Here we go with chapter 5 of My Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolte Taylor. She is she's a brain scientist. Okay. So she has her PhD. She's the real deal. And she's experiencing this stroke, which we just covered in chapter 4. So here we go. Chapter 5, Orchestrating My Rescue. I didn't know exactly what type of stroke I was experiencing, but the congenital arteriovenous malformation, AVM, that burst in my head was spewing a large volume of blood over the left hemisphere of my brain. As blood swept over the higher thinking centers of my left cerebral cortex, I began losing my skills of higher cognition. One precious ability at a time. One precious ability at a time. It was fortunate that I could remember that the best prognosis for someone having a stroke was to get him or her to the hospital as quickly as possible. But getting help was challenging because I found it almost impossible to concentrate or keep my mind on a task. I caught myself chasing random thoughts as they danced in and out of my brain, and sadly, I was fully aware that I was inept at holding a plan in my mind long enough to execute it. The two cerebral hemispheres of my brain had worked meticulously well together for my entire life, as they enabled me to function in the world. But now, because of the normal differences and asymmetry of function between my right and left hemispheres, I felt disjoined from the linguistic and calculating skills of my left brain. Where were my numbers? Where was my language? What had become of the brain chatter, which was now replaced by a pervasive and enticing inner peace? CT image of Jill's brain on the morning of the stroke. Hemorrhage in Jill's left hemisphere. This is really just a drawing. It's not like the actual CT scan, but you can see. This book is like made by Penguin Publishing. So when I first got it, I feel like it was made for children to understand. So I don't know if that is true, but I'm sure you all remember like back in school, Penguin Publishing. So anyway, distraction. What side of my brain is that on? Without the linearity associated with the constant brain directives of my left brain, I struggled to maintain a cognitive connection to my external reality inside of a continuous flow of experience that could be divided into past, present, and future. Every moment seemed to exist in perfect isolation. Okay, sorry, because I'm like turning towards my microphone and away from it, so hopefully it's not too distracting. Where did we go? Okay. In this emptiness of verbal cues, I felt devoid of my worldly wisdom, and I was desperate to maintain a cognitive link between my moments. Repetitively, I obsessed the only message my brain could sustain. What am I trying to do? Get help. I'm trying to make a plan and get help. What am I doing? I have to come up with a plan to get help. Okay, I have to go get help. My information processing for normal access to my brain's information prior to this morning's episode went something like this. I visualize myself sitting in the middle of my brain, which is completely aligned with filing cabinets. When I am looking for a thought or an idea or a memory, I scan the cabinets and identify the correct drawer. Once I find the appropriate file, then I have access to all the information in that file. If I don't immediately find what I'm looking for, then I put my brain back on scan and eventually I access the right data. So that's how she normally does things. But this morning, my information processing was completely aberrant. Even though my brain remained lined with filing cabinets, it was as if all the drawers had been slammed shut and the cabinets pushed just beyond my reach. I was aware that I knew all this stuff, that my brain held a wealth of information, but where was it? If the information was still there, I could no longer retrieve it. I wondered if I would ever reconnect with linguistic thought or retrieve the mental images of my life. I was saddened that perhaps those portions of my mind were now lost forever. Devoid of language and linear processing, I felt disconnected from my life that I had lived. And in the absence of my cognitive pictures and expansive ideas, time escaped me. The memories from my past were no longer available for recollection, leaving me cloaked from the bigger picture of who I was and what I was doing here as a life form. Focused completely in the present moment, my pulsing brain felt like it was gripped in a vice. And here, deep within the absence of the earthly temporality, boundaries of my earth body dissolved and I melted into the universe. As the hemorrhaging blood interrupted the normal function of my left brain, my perception was released from its attachment to categorization and detail. As the dominating fibers of my left hemisphere shut down, they no longer inhibited my right hemisphere, and my perception was free to shift, such that my consciousness could embody the tranquility of my right mind. Swathed in an unfolding sensation of liberation and transformation, essence of my consciousness shifted into a state that felt amazingly similar to my experience in Thetaville. I'm no authority, but I think the Buddhists would say I entered the mode of existence they call nirvana. In the absence of my left hemisphere's analytical judgment, I was completely entranced by the feelings of tranquility, safety, blessedness, euphoria, and omniscience. Omniscience. Yeah, I think that's how it's pronounced. A piece of me yearned to be released completely from the capacity of the physical form, which throbbed with pain. But providentially, in spite of the attraction of this unremitting temptation, something inside of me remained committed to the task of orchestrating my rescue, and it persevered to ultimately save my life. Stumbling into my office space, I turned the lights down low because the light stimulation burned my brain like wildfire. The harder I tried to stay focused and concentrate on what I was doing in here and now, the more intense the throbbing in my head reverberated. It took great effort just to stay attentive, and my mind groped to hold on, to remember what it is that I'm doing. What am I doing? Call for help. I'm trying to call for help. I vacillated between moments of being able to think clearly. I call these waves of clarity, and the lack of the ability to think at all. Feeling cast out of synchrony with life I had known. I was concurrently disturbed and fascinated by what I was witnessing as the systematic breakdown of my cognitive mind. Time stood still because that clock that would sit and tick in the back of my left brain, that clock that helped me establish linearity between my thoughts, was now silent. Without the internal concept of reality or the complementary brain activity that helped me navigate myself linearly, I found myself floating from isolated moment to isolated moment. A no longer A had no longer had any relationship to B, and one was no longer relative to two. These types of sequences required an intellectual connection that my mind could no longer perform. Even the simplest of calculations, by definition, requires recognition of the relationship between different entities, and my mind was no longer capable of creating combinations. So again, I sat befuddled, waiting for the next intermittent thought or wave of clarity. In anticipation of the eventual arrival of of an idea that would connect me to something in objective reality, my mind kept repeating, what is it I'm trying to do? Why didn't I just call 911? The hemorrhage was growing in my cranium. The hemorrhage growing in my cranium was positioned directly over the portion of my left brain that understood what a number was. The neurons that coded 911 were now swimming in a pool of blood. So the concept simply didn't exist for me. Why didn't I just skip downstairs and ask my landlady for help? She was home on maternity leave and would have been happy to give me a lift. But her file, again, a detail in the big picture of my life in relation to those around me, didn't exist anymore. Why didn't I walk out into the street and flag down a stranger for help? It never crossed my mind. And this incapacitation the only option I had was the one I was desperate to remember, which was how to call for help. All I could do was sit and wait, sit patiently with the phone by my side and wait in silence. So there I sat, home alone with these transient thoughts that evaded me, almost teasing me as they flitted in and out of my mind. I sat waiting for a wave of clarity that would permit my mind to connect two thoughts and give me a chance at forming an idea, a chance to execute a plan. I sat silently intoning, what am I doing? Call for help, call for help. I'm trying to call for help. In the hope that I might consciously evoke another wave of clarity, I placed the phone on the desk in front of me and stared at its keypad, searching for some recollection of a number to dial. My wandering brain felt empty and sore as I forced it to concentrate and pay attention. Pulsing, pulsing, pulsing. Gosh, my brain hurt. In an instant, a number flashed through my mind's eye. It was my mother's number. How thrilling that I could remember. How wonderful that I could not only recall a number, but that I knew whose number it was. And how remarkable, though unfortunate, that even in this precarious condition, I realized that my mother lived more than 1,000 miles away, and how inappropriate it would be to call her. I thought to myself, no way, I can't, wait, I can't call Mama and tell her I'm having a stroke. That would be horrible. She would freak out. I've got to come up with a plan. In a moment of clarity, I knew that if I could call work, my colleagues at the Harvard Brain Tissue Resource Center would get me help. If only I could remember the number at work. And how ironic it was that I had spent the previous 2 years singing the Brain Bank jingle to audiences all around the country, including lyrics. Just dial 1-800-BRAIN-BANK for information, please. But on this morning, with all those memories set beyond my reach, I retained only a vague idea of who I was and what I was trying to accomplish. Posed at my desk in a bizarre mental fog, I continued to coax my mind by obsessing. What is the number at work? Where do I work? The brain bank. I work at the brain bank. What is the number at the brain bank? What am I doing? I'm calling for help. I'm calling work. Okay, what is the number at work? My normal perception of this external world had been successfully established by the constant exchange of information between my right and left hemispheres. Because of cortical laterality, each half of my brain specialized in slightly varied functions. And when put together, my brain could precisely manufacture a realistic perception of the external world. Although I had been a very bright child with tremendous potential for learning, my two hemispheres had never been equal in their natural abilities. My right hemisphere excelled at understanding the big picture of ideas and concepts, but my left hemisphere had to work extremely hard to memorize random facts and details. As a result, I was one of those people who rarely chose to cognitively code a phone number as a random sequence of numbers. Instead, my mind automatically created some sort of pattern, most often a visual pattern, to which I attached the sequence. In the case of phone numbers, I generally memorized the pattern as it dialed on the touch tone keypad. Privately, I always wondered how I would have survived in a world of rotary telephones where such schematic ploys would have been much more challenging. Throughout my youth, my mind had been much more interested in how things were intuitively related, right hemisphere, than how they were categorically different, left hemisphere. My mind preferred thinking in pictures, right hemisphere, as opposed to language, left hemisphere. It wasn't until my graduate school years and fascination with my anatomy that my mind excelled in detail memorization and retrieval. After a childhood of information processing through sensory, visual, and pattern association strategies, the tapestry of my knowledge was all intimately interlinked. The downfall to this type of learning system, of course, is that it only works when all the pieces of the network are functioning and interacting properly. On this morning, as I sat and contemplated the phone number for work, I remembered that there was something unique about the patterning of our office codes. Something like my number ended in 10, which was the exact opposite of my boss's number, which ended in 01. And my colleague's number fell right in the middle. But because my left hemisphere was drowning in a puddle of blood, I could not access the specifics of my mental inquiry, and the linearity of mathematics befuddled me. I kept thinking, what's in the middle between 01 and 10? I decided that looking at the phone keypad might be helpful. I cannot help but to wonder, like, how much time has passed while she's doing all this, because I'm like, hurry up and dial 911, right? Okay. Sitting at my desk, I placed the phone directly in front of me and sat patiently for a few moments, awaiting the next wave of clarity. Again, I intoned, what is the number at work? What is the number at work? After several minutes of holding the phone and drawing a blank, a list of 4 digits suddenly appeared in my mind. 2405, 2405. I repeated it over and over to myself. 2405. In order to not forget, I picked up a pen. With my non-dominant left hand, I quickly jotted down the image I saw in my mind. A 2 was no longer a 2, but rather a squiggle that looked like a 2. Fortunately, the 2 on the phone pad looked just like the 2 in my mind's eye. So I drew the squiggles that represented what I saw. 2405. Somehow I understood that this was only part of the number. What was the rest? There was a prefix. Something came first. So again, I started intoning. What is the prefix? What is the prefix at work? Faced with this dilemma, it occurred to me that it was not necessarily an advantage that when we are at work, we merely have to dial extension numbers. Because of this lack of routine use, the pattern for my prefix recognition was not coded in the exact same file in my brain as the rest of the extension numbers. So back I went on a mission to retrieve information, and I questioned, what is the prefix? What is the prefix at work? For my entire life, I had been exposed to phone numbers with very low prefixes: 232, 234, 332, 335, etc. But grasping at anything flitting through my mind, any possibility at all, the code 855 flashed as a visual. Initially, I thought that this was the most absurd prefix I had ever heard because the numbers seemed so high. But at this point, anything was worth a try. In anticipation of the next wave of clarity, I cleared the desk in front of me because it was only 9:15 a.m. and I was only 15 minutes late for work. No one would really be missing me yet. With a plan in mind, I plodded on. I felt tired. I felt vulnerable and completely fragmented as I sat there waiting. Although I was consistently distracted by an enveloping sense of being at one with the universe, I was desperate to carry out my plan to get help. Within my mind, I rehearsed over and over again what I needed to do and what I would say. But keeping my mind turned in to what I was trying to do was like struggling to hang on to slippery fish. Task one, hold the thought in mind. Task two, execute the internal perception in the external world. Pay attention. Hold on to the fish. Hold on to the understanding that this is a phone. Hold on for the next functional moment of clarity. I kept rehearsing in my mind. This is Jill. I need help. This is Jill. I need help. This process had already taken 45 minutes for me to figure out who and how to call for help. During the next wave of clarity, I dialed the number by matching the squiggles on the paper to the squiggles on the phone pad. To my great fortune, my colleague and good friend, Dr. Stephen Vincent, was sitting at his desk. As he picked up the receiver, I could hear him speak, but my mind could not decipher his words. I thought, oh my gosh, he sounds like a golden retriever. I realized that my left hemisphere was so garbled that I could no longer understand speech. Yet I was so relieved to be connected to another human being that I blurted out, "This is Jill, I need help." Well, at least that's what I tried to say. What exactly came out of my mouth was more akin to grunts and groans. But fortunately, Steve recognized my voice. It was clear to him that I was in some sort of trouble. Apparently, all those years of hollering up and down the halls at work had earned me a recognizable squawk. I was shocked. However, when I did realize that I could not speak intelligibly, I, even though I could hear myself speak clearly within my mind, "This is Jill, I need help." The sounds coming out of my throat did not match the words in my brain. I was disturbed to comprehend that my left hemisphere was even more disabled than I had realized. Although my left hemisphere could not decipher the meaning of the words he spoke, to the meaning of the words he spoke, my right hemisphere interpreted the soft tones in his voice to mean that he would get help. Territory of Jill's hemorrhage, shaded oval area. This is what we already saw, but it was starting to expand now. Motor cortex, sensory cortex, orientation, association cortex. That's the physical boundaries, time and space. I'm trying to explain less and less to see if you start remembering what these things are because they make sense. Broca's area, ability to create speech. Wernicke's area, ability to understand speech. Okay. Finally, in that moment, I could relax. I didn't need to understand the details of what he would do. I knew that I had done all I could do, all that anyone could have hoped that I would do to save my life. All right, so here is what I was just reading about. All right, I think that's the end. Yeah, all right. Next is chapter 6. All right, see you later. Bye.